Welcome to Dog Life Radio.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back once again to Dog Life Radio. Thank you so much for coming back. Got another fantastic episode coming at ya. And I am your host, Rossi Giugio. Welcome aboard, everybody. We are getting ready for liftoff. So this week, This week, I'm going to introduce to you the conversation I had with Dr. Corey Peacock. Corey is the head performance coach and sports scientist down at Peacock Performance down in Florida. So what exactly is that? So he provides strength and conditioning and physiological analysis and injury prevention methodologies for some of the world's elite combat athletes. I'm talking about the 1% of the 1%, the tip of the spear, legit fighters here. So for those of you who do follow professional mixed martial arts, you'll know these names. We're talking about names like Anthony Rumble Johnson, Volkan Ozdemir, Michael Chandler Jr., just to name a couple of them. There's a whole bunch more I could rattle off, but I'm just not going to go down that path. But anyway, Corey handles a huge amount of these pro athletes. A little bit on him. He's got his master's in applied exercise science from Ashland University. He's got his doctoral from Kent State, exercise physiology. So from there he moved on, and he was a professor of health and human performance at Nova Southeastern University. And from there, what happened this is just a little taste of the inside of what happened on his journey. But from there, he took on just a variety or a plethora, if you will, if you know that word, the plethora of coaching opportunities, consulting opportunities, and gigs in college football, professional hockey, the NHL, the NFL, and work with a shit ton of MMA fighters and teams. All of that led to the culmination where he was the head performance coach with a huge, big name in MMA in terms of one of the big teams. He was with the Black Zillions, so I'm positive many folks are familiar with the Black Zillions. So he was there for a long time with a corral of around 30 or so pro fighters, most of which in the UFC and some of the other big-name fight groups. So all of that. Now he's the head coach over at Peacock Performance. So Dr. Corey Peacock is the head of Peacock Performance, so you can kind of make that connection. He did, obviously, create his own institute. So now he's specializing in human performance, nutrition, with that huge, that legit group of fighters. So anyway, I had the chance to talk to him, and it was fantastic. So that's going to come at you in just a moment or two. We're going to just plug a whole bunch of social media things. I'll come back with the podcast that you should be listening to. Now's part of the show where I get to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, all at Dog Life Radio. And if you are such a diehard fan of the show, remember, you can now get merchandise. That's right, Dog Life Radio merchandise. Just go to sixsquirrelstudios.com and check out the store. That is 6, squirrel, singular, SQUIRREL, studios.com. When you get there, take a look at the upper right-hand part of the screen, and you will see the Six Squirrel Studios store. Check it out. You can get T-shirts, stickers, hoodies, all kinds of cool stuff. So get your Dog Life Radio merchandise there. And lastly, not only do I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, remember to subscribe or follow, depending on, I guess, whichever podcasting service you utilize, but also drop me a rating on iTunes. Hit me up with a 4 or 5 star rating. It's the best way for people to hear and find my show. That's aside from you guys spreading the good word. And as always, don't be shy about sending me some feedback at dogliferadio@yahoo.com. Thank you.
Hello, faithful podcast listener. I'm the Incredible Jeff.
And I'm the Amazing D-Man.
And together, we host Fueled by Deathcast, a weekly podcast show from Death Wish Coffee Company, the makers of the world's strongest coffee.
That's right, and you can find us every Thursday on deathwishcoffee.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, Google Music, and more.
And watch us live on the Death Wish Coffee Company Facebook page and check out all our videos on YouTube.
We bring you the latest interesting news in the science world, an exclusive look at the world's strongest coffee company, and a special guest every week.
The guests could be rock stars, actors, authors, athletes, or even astronauts, and we ask them all the question, what fuels you?
So tune in every week to find out the answer, get inspired, and fuel your passion with Fueled by Deathcast.
The podcast that you should be listening to is, I think I've hit this show once before. It's called Massonomics. Heavy into the weightlifting genre, I guess. Anyway, check out episode 128. They do a review of The Vertical Diet. So The Vertical Diet is a new book or diet program, if you will, that's been on the market for a little while. Stan Efferding is the author and proponent of it. So the group read the book, and they do a pretty good review. I mean, I've heard Stan speak on at least a half dozen shows, different podcasts, and he does talk about a great deal of the detail in the book, and it gets into what to eat, how to eat, and how it works, which as any of you who are listening know, that is a big piece of what I like to listen to, I like to talk about, like to get the guests on to hit on these things. This group of folks over at Massonomics did a pretty good job of reviewing the book, so I enjoyed the show. They talk about it, they break it down, and then at the end they do their own 5M ranking type of system, M for Massonomics. But check that out. Definitely worth it. Episode 128. And with that, we're going to turn it over to my conversation with Corey. But before I do, we recorded this a couple of weeks back before the Tyron Woodley and Darren Till fight. The only reason why I'm going to provide a little bit of context is they were fighting for the 170-pound welterweight strap in the UFC. Woodley's the champ. Till was the challenger at the time. We now know Woodley finished Till, but the big piece of it is at the time we were preparing and we were having a conversation. We were talking about one of Corey's big studs, Kamaru Usman, who is definitely still in the conversation in terms of who should be next for a title shot. But we now know that with Tyron beaten Till, and there's just conversation, speculation of who he's going to fight next. You never know. By the time this actually airs, they may announce who it is. Maybe it will be Kamaru. Maybe it will be Colby Covington, who was the interim champ. So all of that really doesn't play too much into our conversation, but just from a contextual perspective. I spoke with Corey before the Woodley-Till fight, and that's now passed. The editing process is taking whatever time it's going to take, and then this one will be dropped right now because you're listening to it. Anyway, have fun. This was a great show. It was an awesome conversation. Enjoy.
All right, the tape is rolling, and we are live. This is Rossi, and I am here with Dr. Corey Peacock. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here on Dog Life Radio.
Absolutely, Rossi. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, this was great. It's funny how the more that I get involved in doing different shows and talking with different people, I find that the world of health and fitness is such an open book. People are so willing to help out, and the fact that you and I were introduced virtually through a common acquaintance, and that you offered yourself up was fantastic, and I definitely appreciate it.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think like-minded people like yourself, myself, I think that's the thing that's, continuing to allow this field to grow and evolve.
Absolutely. And it's funny how the evolution of this field, the like-mindedness, I feel it's becoming more of a way of life versus being health conscious was like something that you had to make a specific effort to do. And it was singularly threaded, meaning I'm going to go on a diet and I'm going to lose some weight. years and years ago, where I find that today you find that you have holistic approaches. And what I mean by holistic is it's diet, it's nutrition, it's mindset, it's everything. All of these things together are the best way to really get at, really full human potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, in my current role, as head of performance, it's everything that you just mentioned under that umbrella of what is athletic performance now.
That's very cool. So that's a great starting point. Let's jump there. Let's talk a little bit about your current role and what you're doing today, what you've got going on over at Peacock Performance and Physiology. I know I'm going to mispronounce it.
No, that's all right. Just go Peacock Performance. That's easier. So currently, I have my business Peacock Performance, primarily focused on combat sports. Majority of my clientele, I would say 90% of my clientele, is UFC, Glory Kickboxing, Bellator, or BJJ of some sort. And also, we basically provide our services for a team known as Hard Knocks 365. They're based out of Fort Lauderdale as well. Roughly 25 to 30 high-level professional fighters at their facility. So we take care of the majority of those athletes for their performance, strength and conditioning, and those kind of things. Kind of a segue into what you said, looking at the evolution of this field. I'm technically the head of performance for that team, and that encompasses a lot of different things, going from strength and conditioning to sports nutrition and weight cuts, to prehab, rehab, and recovery strategies, and some of the sports science techniques that we're utilizing with these athletes to try to decrease injury rates and improve, in performance, wins, losses, and that kind of thing. So it's a great setup that we have down here in South Florida, and just a lot of great coaches, a lot of great resources, and high-level fighters.
It sounds incredible, and it makes perfect sense to me how when you start talking about performance, how you talk about diet, nutrition, strength, and conditioning, everything that goes along with it, evaluations, the prehab and rehab. What I was getting at before when I was saying how things were somewhat singularly threaded or targeted specific at these small pieces of the entire equation, I look at it as getting at that desired result. You have so many different variables, and you just rattle off all of them. So it's a huge amount of stuff that you're offering down at Peacock Performance.
Yep.
Very cool. So can you talk to me, let's talk a little bit about prehab and rehab. That's a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've heard a lot of, I'll call it, noise on. Let's start off with, what the definition is of it, and we can go from there.
Sure. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have a great group of individuals down here that take care of a lot of those aspects. We have a physical therapist, a chiropractor, and those kind of things that we refer our athletes to for those particular prehab things. I would say our company itself kind of focuses more on the recovery aspect and modalities. Different things like compression therapy and cryotherapy and different things like that are kind of what we focus on. But, essentially with this prehab, rehab, looking at the definition and what it is that we're trying to do, it's kind of a cheesy analogy, but it's the idea of taking a table with 3 legs and stacking as much stuff as you can on top of it. It's going to hold for a little bit, but eventually that weak link, that missing leg is going to show, and you're going to watch the table come crumbling down. Same thing with these athletes. These athletes are coming from a wide variety of different backgrounds, from collegiate wrestling to, high-level Golden Gloves boxing and different things like that. So you're not going to find an athlete that's in perfect health, and you're going to find these little weak links as you go through the evaluation process and things like that. So the idea of really taking that necessary and precautious time, especially in between fights and out of camp, to focus on these weaknesses and try to improve those things, so that when the time comes, when we hit that last 8 weeks, we don't have any weak links going into that camp, and we can focus a lot more on fight-specific training, high-intensity training, and those kind of things.
So, and as we continue to talk about this in the context of high-performance athletes, we're talking about like the top 1% of the 1% here. So, when you were talking about cryotherapy, chiropractors, I can think of the different tools and techniques, at least from my perspective, of ice baths, massages, using foam rollers, and all of these types of techniques. Now, when you're going from, I'm the everyday person, I'm just a regular guy who likes to work out, who likes to be in shape, who's trying to be as thoughtful about my approaches to it. When you're moving to that top 1%, I feel like you're now starting to use every tool that's in the toolbox, as opposed to where I could probably get away with just using one or two, depending upon how intense my week was.
Sure. Well, I think that's the biggest thing, and I would say the difference between looking at your everyday gym goer general population compared to these athletes, for us, I think one of the biggest differences for our high-level athletes is every recovery modality, prehab and rehab, is scheduled into their weekly routine. And I think that's a little different than your general population where, I might hit squats today. Hey, I'm a little sore. Maybe today I'll throw the Normatec boots on because I feel like I need a little something. Whereas these athletes, we've been with them long enough. We've monitored them through sports science. We've been able to basically determine when throughout the week they were going to have low neural drive, when throughout the week you were going to see a lot of the different markers associated with muscle soreness, pain, inflammation, and things like that. So we've been able to schedule these modalities into their camp as almost part of their training. A recovery session isn't just because they're sore. A recovery session is a planned and scheduled session through this camp, and for that goal of performing at the highest level on that night of competition.
Now, do you ever have any, conversations or disagreements about those schedules? Meaning, like you've got an athlete and they're scheduled for one aspect of rehabilitation, or they're feeling, I feel fine, I feel great, I'm at tip top, I don't need to do this, but it's part of their protocol of ramping up for their fights. Have you had that in the past with any of the individuals?
Oh yeah, I mean honestly, I can attest to this. I was a collegiate football player as well, and nobody likes to do rehab. It's not fun. There's nothing fun about doing those kind of things. Nobody likes jumping into a freezing cold ice bath and freeze their ass off for 15 minutes. It's not something anybody wants to do. So yeah, I watch these guys try to dance around these sessions as much as possible. But I think over time, objective data, a lot of my athletes are very in tune with their training, with their bodies. A lot of them coming from an educated background, being collegiate wrestlers and, different things like that. They're in tune to their body, and I think when we can show them different measures that we might be collecting throughout camp, looking at, I had said this a little bit ago, but neural drive or heart rate variability, just looking at indicators of performance, even looking at some of the weekly testing that we will do from a physical standpoint. I think when the athletes see improvements in these numbers based around these recovery strategies, they'll buy in. And don't get me wrong, they'll still, if they get a chance to skip an ice bath session, they will. I believe that. I think they've bought in for the most part, and getting any form of recovery, it's necessary. And I'll be honest, I think you've mentioned quite a few different apparatuses. I mentioned quite a few. I think a lot of people will ask, what is the best? I don't think there's really a clear answer for that. I've seen how my athletes respond to certain stimulus and certain apparatuses and things like that, so I have a pretty good idea of that. For me, though, I think the biggest thing that we can do with our athletes is figure out a way to get them to sit down, to get them to rest, to get them to try to bring that physiological state back down to homeostasis and prepare for their next competition. And, that to me is a win, and it's just part of it.
So do you find that maybe that, I guess that battle to get them to bring it down and bring it back to that homeostasis, as you were saying, is because generally speaking, these high performance athletes, these people they're alphas. They want to go. They're built for this sport. They're built to go, whether it's MMA or I know you've had a great deal of experience with, high-level athletes in other sports, the NFL and so forth. Do you feel it's kind of like almost counter to the wiring in their head, the nature of competition and their drive to continue to move?
They're different, and I will say that. I mean, I feel like a lot of these individuals are very sympathetically driven, more so than the general population to begin with. But I agree there is a mental aspect of this. There is an alpha aspect to this. But along with that, there are things that these athletes can do that are different, that go against what you and I believe as, validated science and things like that. And, it's an example of something like this. We do VO2 max testing with a lot of our athletes to try to establish a couple of different things between thresholds, aerobic capacity, caloric expenditure, substrate utilization, things like that. But there are certain numbers that have been physiologically proven through science to be indicators of, a termination, the end of the test and things like that, where some of the capabilities that these athletes have when they hit that number and their ability to sustain that physiological stress and damage and be able to prolong it for a long period of time is completely different than anything I've learned or experienced in the past, through education and things like that. So, it's different. Their capabilities and their work capacity is different than the normal individual, and that's really all I can say about it. It's very rare that you're going to see a lot of research and a lot of science out there with high-level mixed martial artists. So as a population, we really have very limited information on the capabilities and the restraints and those kind of things that these athletes have. So it's an evolving field. The sport's 20 years old, so it's relatively new. And I think we're just now starting to make some way in understanding these athletes and understanding this sport.
Yeah, I agree. And
you cut in and out a little bit there, Rossi. Can you repeat that?
Yep, sorry about that. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, cool. So it's funny, sorry about that. You were saying your sport's about 20 years old, and I think about MMA fighters 20 years ago versus the MMA fighters of today. I mean, they're head and shoulders different. I mean, you're still talking the same sport, but you're talking about moving from, somebody who is potentially really strong striker and who may understand concepts of wrestling to, somebody who's drastically more well-rounded. Somebody like, I think of like Tyron Woodley, who's got this incredible background in wrestling, but who's a killer on his feet as well. And just even more so looking at some of the newer ones, and I'm sure you're working with them, where not only do we not have the data on the sport in general, but holistically the sport has changed so dramatically in that 20 years.
Sure. No, I couldn't agree more. I'm fortunate enough, like you said, that I've worked with a lot of the new fighters, kind of the new wave of fighters, but I'm also fortunate enough to spend some time with some of the legends in the sport. Vitor Belfort is a guy that any MMA fan knows across the globe, and he's an athlete that was doing this 20 years ago when it first came out, and has still competed, until he just recently retired at the highest level. And it's interesting to speak to somebody like that. And, I've been fortunate enough to work with him for quite a few camps. He's actually the first client that I actually had in the sport. And you're right. It's just the evolution of this sport has drastically changed. I definitely would say, I think when you're looking at that, you mentioned Tyron Woodley and what he's been able to do, both wrestling and now striking. I think we're seeing a trend in that, where I do believe these athletes with a very strong wrestling background, but also have a high level of athleticism, are starting to show a lot of dominance, because I think it goes back to this, where athletes can learn striking a little bit faster than I believe athletes can learn the grappling aspect, and I truly believe that. I mean, that wrestling culture is a grind. That's more than just learning a skill, but it's learning a grinding lifestyle, a weight cut lifestyle. It's not an easy lifestyle to be able to adapt to or pick up later on in life. And I think we're seeing that trend where these athletic wrestlers are starting to become very dominant in the sport. And I think it goes to a testament. Another guy I've been fortunate enough to work with, looking at Rashad Evans, I think he sort of evolved this, where the ground game was really strong 15 years ago, but people had to be careful of jiu-jitsu guys and things like this. And you have somebody like Rashad, who was a very strong wrestler, who was also very athletic, and sort of adapted this wrestling into a total mixed martial arts fighting style, using feints, using athleticism, using striking, and using wrestling. And I think the sport's just evolved drastically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's funny because I don't know if I would say wrestling is the most important aspect of mixed martial arts, but I like the way you framed it when you said it's the grind. It's not only the body control and the movement and the skill sets, that's 100% there, but it's the grind of the continuous practicing, the continuous weight cuts, the whole mentality of it is been proven that when people are making that transfer over into MMA, it seems to be, anyway, at this point, like a really easy transference. Like when you see somebody like Gokhan Saki coming over from the kickboxing or K1, obviously his striking is on point. Nobody's going to argue that. But there's all of these other elements where if you're on your feet, he seems to be okay, but there's so many other elements to what's happening. And I absolutely agree. It's funny, you're seeing, if you look across at least the UFC right now, and you think about who the champs are, where their backgrounds are. I mean, you look at Daniel Cormier for heavyweight and light heavyweight, obviously the wrestling background there, and you can do the math from there and take a look at the rest of them.
And that's one of those things too. Looking at Cormier, unfortunately I've coached against him 3 times. Between Anthony Johnson and Volkan Ozdemir, and at the end of the day, it was that wrestling pedigree that Cormier had that that's how he won those fights.
Yeah, that way. I think the wrestling background. You mentioned weight cutting, and that's just such an interesting topic, especially with what's been happening recently, and then the upcoming fight. I mean, anytime Khabib is getting ready to fight, the weight cutting, not controversy, but those pieces are going to come back up, and people are going to talk about it. As you're working with people at Peacock Performance, and you're providing obviously the strength conditioning, and you're getting into diet and nutrition, and they're preparing for that. How are you approaching weight cutting down in Florida?
That's a loaded question. This is, it's a tough topic. I think maybe just using a real life example might be the best way to do so. Maybe we could use middleweight, for example. Looking at a 185-pound athlete that we've had competing, 4 titles, different things like that. Athlete typically is going to come in, I would say, anywhere between about 10 to 12% over their competition weight. In the sake of some of our middleweights, we could see them anywhere up to about 15% above the scale weight. It's not great, but some of these athletes have been able to do so. When you actually look at that and think about what they're going to be able to do, we look at body fat percentage, we look at our ability to lose a certain amount of weight, and with that said, we usually say that I don't think body fat is a good indicator of performance, but I do think there are certain body fat percentages where these athletes can compete better, And, when we look at that, we want to keep our athletes somewhere between about 5 and 10% body fat. For the sake of our 185 athlete, they're going to start camp probably somewhere around 212 pounds. So that gives us about 14 pounds of fat to spare, putting them down around the 198 mark. From there, that's going to be about where they're at going into fight week. We're at about 198 going into that fight week, and that gives us about 13 pounds to shed. I think you can kind of say that anywhere from about 2.5 to about 5 pounds, these athletes are going to lose as they lose a little bit more adipose tissue closer to the fight, the water that's going to be stored within that adipose tissue, and then also when you look at the carbohydrate reduction that they're going to do, looking at liver storage, muscular skeletal muscle storage, and things like that, we can lose those things. So that leaves us about, give or take, you're looking at about 4 to 5% of your total body weight that you can lose in water, and that's really going to be done that last 24 hours. I mean, it's not uncommon for somebody that has to weigh in at 185 pounds to be 194 pounds, 24 hours before that. And it's essentially that. It's preparing the body through camp. We're in a fortunate situation down here in South Florida where, our ability to lose water rapidly, I think, is extremely high because of the temperature, because of the humidity, and the training environment. We're training out of a warehouse, so it's hotter than hell. It's humid as hell year-round, and things like that. So we're losing that. We're losing that quickly. But ultimately, looking at the weight cut process, I mean, that's exactly what it is. As you get closer to the fight, we're going to start to decrease. We're not going to decrease calories. I think there's a big misconception where people think that we need to decrease calories to do so, and we don't need to do that. We just need to adjust the macros, and, we have all of the data on substrate utilization and energy system efficiency that we need on these athletes and what they need to be able to perform. And we just work that way. We take the carbohydrates down, we take the sodium out, we pull the water. We weigh in, and we try to replenish those things as fast as possible. There's different things out there when you look at this. I have athletes that fight in the UFC, that fight. UFC has kind of set a standard now where they allow the athletic commissions to determine whether or not it's safe for an athlete to compete, and they'll typically weigh them in as soon as they arrive on fight week. Bellator's the same way, where they're housed out of different places. They still allow an IV in certain places, but the state of California does not. ONE FC's quite different, where ONE FC actually doesn't allow weight cuts at all. They had an individual pass away a couple years back, and so they modified that. So what we're used to as middleweight being 185 pounds is actually 205 pounds for ONE FC. Same thing, light heavyweight, where we know that is 205 is 225 there, but they also have to weigh in multiple days consecutively, and they're also going to have to provide urine samples and different things like that to make sure that the hydration level is to a certain status. So again, this is a topic I could go on for hours about, and everybody is, everybody's extremely different.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I had heard about the ONE FC's, their move to more of a model where you're fighting at your healthiest weight, whatever that may be. And it's funny because you see some folks in the UFC have made the move to fighting at heavier weight classes, and they've had, great deal of success at it, with like your Cowboy Cerrone's and Dos Anjos moving up from 55 and so forth, where you see that. And I think I don't know, you've got just, like we were saying, it's the 1% of the 1%. Is Donald the example of a 1% of that grouping? I don't know, but you see these approaches where people might be finding out that they can fight healthier if their body is in an optimal state versus, because I know there's been people that have come in and they cut ridiculous amounts of weight where, you had mentioned Anthony Johnson. I mean, it boggles my mind that the guy got down to 170 at points in time.
It's insane because I just saw him. He's got to be 270 right now. And when I say 270, I'm talking he is built. He's not fat. He's not. I mean, he. But yeah. So when I see somebody like him, and even when he was fighting 205, he was big. I mean, he really was about. I mean, he was probably going into camp for Anthony. Probably about 234 would be normal for him to go in there, and just being muscular, and I can't. And from what I understand, I never worked with him when he was at 170, but from what I understood, he was starting that cut around 220, 215. So I just, it just goes to show that, there is, I do believe that the weight cut can be an advantage and can be advantageous for certain people. There is actually an article that just came out showing that, I think it was out of Cal State or something like that, showing that those individuals that actually weighed more during competition showed more success in wins and losses. So I do believe the weight cut, when done properly, is advantageous to these athletes. And actually not so much the weight cut. I actually believe in the rehydration process way more than I do the cut. I think athletes will get they'll get the weight off. They always have. They'll find a way. But I think the proper steps to putting that weight back on is extremely important. And but no, I do agree. There are certain individuals when I look at these guys and I see how bad they're suffering. I have a fighter that I've worked with at lightweight, and I truly believe when we see him fight, we're never seeing him. We're never seeing his true potential. We're seeing how well that weight cut went. And sometimes he'll come out and be a world beater, and that weight cut went smoothly, and he kept his weight down a little bit lower. And there's times when he comes out and he doesn't perform as well as we expect. And it's a product of the weight cut. It's not his preparation. It's not his performance because, he is a world class, in every aspect. But it's definitely that weight cut that is affecting the athlete. And yeah, it's a topic that could go on for forever. And Barry, like you said, it's definitely a topic right now that they've brought some light to. I don't know what the case is, but just certain individuals, it just seems like a lot of main event guys recently have been missing weight. And, it's a very small percentage. It really is. People are talking about the weigh-ins being moved and morning and this and that. And, I don't think that's the case. I just think that we're in a rare situation where it seems like it's just been main event guys that are missing, and it's crazy. Title fights and different things like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. I was thinking of Yoel Romero. Then I was thinking of Darren Till, I think, and it's nuts, and they're missing it by bits and pieces, and I think a lot of main card ones too. I remember seeing I think it was Mackenzie Dern, and it was something else where most of the folks when they're coming in and they're missing. I'm trying to remember it now. Now my age is catching up with me. I had the opportunity to talk with Sam Alvey not too long ago, and he was a super cool guy. And he was not necessarily proud, but he was saying the fact that he was one of the guys that has missed weight and lost, one of the only ones. And it was very much I think it was like 7-1, like 7 people when they miss weight they win, and of the last 8 up to that point in time. And you saw Yoel Romero when he was fighting. He had he had a pretty interesting approach to the fight in the ring, but you can't, he had a couple of really good exchanges, and he looked extremely explosive. But I'm wondering if the weight cut just depleted him, where he was kind of trying to reserve his energy. And it gets to your point of it wasn't Yoel fighting; it was how well did the weight cut go, and we know it didn't go so good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And it's frustrating. It really is. Looking at the situation of Darren Till that you were just talking about, he's lined up to compete this Saturday against Tyron Woodley, and the UFC's taken some measures to make sure that there is a alternate or an athlete ready just in case. And I think that's the first time they've ever. I think that's the first time they've ever done this. One of my fighters, actually, Kamaru Usman, is he's jumped on a plane last night to head to Dallas, and his intention is training as if he has a fight, weighing in on Friday, just in case.
I remember I heard him. He was on Oh God, I think he was on with Matt Serra not too long ago, and he was
Yeah.
talking about that as well. Yeah, and it's really odd that when you're going in and you're planning to have this is the headline, Till and Woodley, it's for the strap, and we'll go from there, and
Right.
just in case we'll have Kamar all teed up and ready. And but that makes a weird situation because so say the fight goes on and occurs and one of the two wins, does that then put Kamar in the spot for the next shot, or does timing play into it? And you've got Colby Covington, the former brief interim welterweight. Does he get in line? It kind of muddies the water in that space.
Yeah, completely. It's a tricky spot, because again, I don't know what the UFC intentions would be to answer that question, but let's just say Tyron and Till do fight, and Tyron wins, but has a injury of some sort that keeps him out 6 months. Then what's the plan next? Now is it Usman Till? Is it Usman Colby? Is it whatever the case might be? You're right. I think it's a backup plan, but I'm not so sure that it's a thought of plan after this weekend.
Yep. I think they're definitely going with the short-term planning for it, and then they're going to have to see what happens when the dust settles and kind of make their next steps from there.
Sure, and I think it's a really tricky spot for all of them to be in. Really, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, that can't be easy on anybody. If let's just say Till does miss weight and they say Usman step in, how are you Tyron Woodley, world champion, who's just prepared for this, this crazy, rangy, big striker, and now you have arguably the best wrestler in the division standing in front of you. That's a tricky situation to be in. Vice versa, you have somebody like Usman who's sitting here preparing for both fighters, not really being able. And actually, I'll be honest with you, I think that's almost been somewhat of an advantage for him in this sake is instead of him game planning for everybody else, this is probably the camp that we've been able to focus on Kamaru more than anybody else. And I'll be honest, I've enjoyed it because it's allowed us to really to fill some holes and work on some things that we've really wanted to be able to work with him, but he's been so busy and so active. I mean, he just won the Ultimate Fighter, just a little over 2 years ago, and here he is on a 9-fight win streak in the UFC. He's been very active.
Yeah, and
preparing for somebody else and not being able just to prepare for himself.
Yeah, and that as he's preparing for somebody else, his tests each time he's stepping into the cage are getting greater and greater. He's not sidestepping. He's definitely an exciting fighter. He's a character and somebody who's, just from my perspective, it looks like he's got a fight or two, and the next two fights, one of them is going to be for a belt. Whether it's going to be some type of maybe he fights Colby and then they fight the winner of whoever wins. Till and Woodley. It could go a million different ways, but I can't see it going more than two fights without that second fight being for a belt, if not the first one.
I agree. I completely agree with that. If he comes out here and takes out 10 wins in a row, and if you look at looking at his statistics, I know some people have a hard time watching wrestlers, and I understand that. They want everything on their feet and brawl. But you look at the numbers that Kamar is putting up, he's beating high-level ranked opponents like 30-24, he's beating the shit out of these guys to the point that every round is a 10-8 because he's so dominant. And like you said, too, even looking at that evolution, Kamaru came into the sport through Rashad Evans, and that's somebody he spends a lot of time with. And Kamaru he's evolved. You've seen him. He knocked out Sergio Morales with a straight punch. Made the guy do a backflip. He's got so much power and so much strength that he can be dangerous anywhere, and he can beat anybody anywhere.
Yeah, and that's the part that makes it exciting is he does show those the flashes everywhere. It's not just you got to watch him. He's going to take you down and he's going to beat the snot out of you on the ground. It's not that way. And I do like the reference to Rashad because Rashad was somebody who kind of came to prominence as I started becoming more and more familiar with the sport. And he was just like this ridiculously explosive fighter. and
Yep.
you really, truly saw him develop and morph into this guy who, you just needed to be ready for anything because you did not know what he was going to do.
Anything, and I think that's what those guys do well. I think Kamaru does a great job of that as well. Same thing Rashad kind of set the game plan for is they do a good job at making you uncomfortable. They do a good job at putting you into their game plan, and it comes with being dangerous everywhere, where they have an ability to dictate the pace, to speed things up, to slow things down, to change levels, to make it a striking match, to make it a clinch match, to make it a they just have so many different characteristics that make them dangerous as a mixed martial artist, and they do such a good job at bringing you into that. And I think that's where a lot of their success comes from, and that's where I definitely see a big similarity between the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask as I'm keeping an eye on the clock, I want to ask one more question for you. And we've done a lot of conversation about fighting, diet, training, rehabilitation, some prehab as well. What about the mental aspect to the game? As these fighters become more and more deadly with their hands and their grappling skills and their training regimens, and the fact that they're pushing cases that are much, they were unheard of, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The mental aspect of the game has also become increasingly important. As you're working with folks down at Peacock Performance, how is the mental aspect and psychology brought into it?
Sure. And I think this kind of goes out of the Peacock Performance window and kind of goes more into the team window. At Hard Knocks 365, we have a wrestling coach, Greg Jones is his name. Anybody listening to this that's a wrestling fan is immediately going to know who he is. He's a 3-time national champion, 4-time All-American, one of 3 people to win 2 divisions, collegiate wrestling national titles. He's an absolute animal, and he's competed at the highest level of the sport of wrestling. He's coached collegiately for multiple years before he made this switch into mixed martial arts coaching. He is an undergrad, or has a bachelor's in sports psych, and he has a master's, I believe, if not some graduate experience in sports psych as well. Really, he's kind of the centerpiece for that idea. He's also coincides with a group known as Mindset Wrestling, and everything they're doing is revolved around sports psych. And I would say he's probably the biggest component for it. And you see it in a lot of different aspects. He has an ability to relate to these athletes, to relate to other coaches on the staff. There's been times where he's even helped me. I can remember being backstage. I think it was UFC 187. We just had one of our athletes get knocked out in the first round. Now here we are going back to the backstage. We're getting ready to have our second athlete come out and fight. And, you can't help but to feel for that athlete that just lost. And I can just remember Greg even grabbing a hold of me and just saying, hey, there's another one coming. So, change it up right now before we walk into that room and let's go. And, it's a guy like that that's so solid when it comes to fight week and competition and things like that it's a huge piece of what we do. But to be honest with you, I don't think any of it is planned. I think it's just second nature for the way it comes off of him and his coaching style and the way he relates to these athletes.
That's incredible. That to me speaks to the evolution of the sport. Absolutely. All right. Well, I lied. I'm going to throw one more quick one to you.
All right, let's hear it.
You are an incredibly busy guy. It sounds like you have got a ton going on. Everything that's going on at Peacock Performance, everything that you're involved in. What is on your plate today? What is the hot thing that you're working on that that's getting you excited today, or call it this week?
Sure. Well, like I said, I would say the biggest thing is the potential for Kamaru to fight this weekend. I would say that's the big thing on this week. Outside of the MMA world, I'm also an associate professor of exercise and sports science at Nova Southeastern University. And we're actually we are pilot testing a new research study that we are doing. The research study is going to look at different variables associated with brain health and cognitive functioning, and I think it's a really hot topic. It's myself, a couple of different researchers here, a former NFL athlete, Julius Thomas. He's a graduate student here at Nova Southeastern, Pro Bowler tight end, great tight end, Super Bowl champ, I believe. And he and I are tag teaming along with a couple of other professors to put this protocol together for mixed martial arts athletes, for NFL athletes. Retired NFL athletes would be the focus, but obviously there's going to be a wide variety of contact sports involved by the time we're done with this. I think the big thing is I don't want to throw out the term CTE because I know everybody gets scared with it, but, being able to track certain markers associated with CTE and being able to look at cognitive function and longevity and things like that, I think are extremely important as this sport, as the NFL and things like that evolve. So we're going to be pilot testing that today, and super excited about getting this going. And like I said, it's for me, my intention with something like this is not to bring awareness to all of the things athletes shouldn't be doing and brain contact and this and that. That's not the case. I think bringing awareness to what athletes should be doing is extremely important, and how to take precautions and how to train properly and how to prepare for certain things like this that are associated with any competitive sport, but combat sports being on the forefront of what we're trying to do. So really excited about that, and like I said, we're going to have that off the ground today.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely incredible. So where would somebody go to follow you, to keep up on everything that's going on with you, the study, anything else, website, social media? What have you got for us?
Sure. I think the easiest thing to see on a day-to-day basis would be Instagram or social media. You can find me at Dr. C, as in Corey, Peacock, so Dr. C Peacock. That would be my Twitter, Instagram handles. Outside of that, you can go to Peacock Performance. You could look into the Fight Science Institute, or you could look at the International Society of Sports Nutrition. I would say between those organizations and the things that I'm doing, you should be able to find just about everything out there.
All right. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Corey, for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been awesome. I feel like I could talk another hour with you easy at the drop of a hat.
Hey, that's easy. Let's set it up soon.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, Rossi. Appreciate it.